Well, we saw them in James's report there. This year marks 100 years since the end of the First World War. Commemorations have been taking place all the way around the world, and one that's really caught the public's imagination is the poppies at the Tower of London. This art installation called Blood-Swept Lands of Seas of Red has been seen by tens of thousands of people. Each poppy represents a life, but with so much time passed since the Great War, is the image of the poppy still relevant? Well, joining us this morning are the Shadow Defence Minister Gemma Doyle, who's in Westminster and who thinks the poppy is still relevant, in central London, the journalist Maddy Fry, who thinks that there is a risk that symbols like the poppy could promote jingoism, and in Belfast, First World War historian Tom Thorpe. Just before we get started, though, a reminder, you can join the debate too. You can tweet us at Sky News, including the hashtag Sky Debate, text on 84501, email news@sky.com. Let us know what you think, or if there's any points that you want to put to our guests here. We'll try to read out some of your comments as we go along. Tom Thorpe, let's start with you. Remind us, why was the poppy adopted as this symbol? What does it mean?
Well, the poppy, I'll just give you some background to the poppy. I don't know if you've ever been to France, but when you go drive over some of the fields, you'll see that these poppies grow naturally on disturbed ground. And they were first noticed by a Canadian colonel called John McCrae, who wrote a famous poem called In Flanders Fields, which he wrote after the death of one of his friends in the attack on Ypres in 1915. And this poem is very, very famous, and it was picked up by an American called Mona Michael, who suggested that the poppy be a symbol for remembrance. And then this was taken forward by the American Legion and then adopted by the British Legion in 1921. And since then it's been something which has been used to commemorate the war and support servicemen who maybe have suffered from war.
OK. Gemma Doyle, as we heard, it started with the First World War. What does it mean to you? Why do you continue to wear it today?
I think the poppy is a very recognisable symbol, and everyone knows that it is about remembering the fallen, as Tom said. It also raises millions of pounds every year to support the Armed Forces community, in particular those who have been injured. So I think it is still a very important symbol today, and as you said, we've seen crowds flocking to see the poppies at the Tower of London. So yes, I think it is still very much an important symbol in the UK.
What does it mean to you personally, putting it on? Why do you put it on personally?
Well, as I say, it is very, very simply about remembering those who fell in war, people who had no opinion, no choice about the conflicts into which they were sent. Those are decisions that politicians make, and the people who serve in the forces do so on behalf of the whole of our country, and on behalf, as I say, it's the politicians who make the decisions. So I wear my poppy to thank them, but as I say, it's very much about remembering the people who have fallen.
OK, well, in central London is journalist Maddy Fry. Maddy, you choose not to wear the poppy. Why?
That's right, and that's because I believe, although I have no problem initially with commemorating the men who fell in the First World War, I have a problem with the way I think the poppy's been hijacked as a way of justifying the wars that we've been in recently, in a way of vindicating the military unquestioningly, and I think it prevents us from asking quite tough questions about why we're fighting. And I do reject the notion that...
Do you think people really think that much about it, or do you think they just think, this reminds me of the First World War, this reminds me of the people who gave their lives for our freedom, I'm going to put it on to remind me and remind others that I'm proud of what they did for us?
Well, I think actually you find there are a lot of people who don't actually believe the First World War was a fight for our freedom. I think people probably believe that more about the Second World War, and that particularly with the White Poppy campaign, you see people who think, I want to acknowledge how much these men suffered and how they were conscripted and they suffered through no choice of their own, but I don't want to always believe war is always a good thing. And I think that's something we shouldn't forget, and the poppy should be a reminder of that, but it frequently isn't.
Gemma Doyle, what do you think of that? Is there a whiff of jingoism to wearing the poppy, do you think?
No, I think it's unfortunate that Madeleine is trying to ascribe a political opinion to the poppy. It is not about supporting British foreign policy. It is not about passing judgment on any particular military interventions. It is actually about remembering the people who have died because of decisions sometimes that politicians have made, whether or not they thought it was the right thing to do. And you know, it is only seems to be Madeleine who's trying to make it into a political statement. I meet people all the time who wear the poppy who have completely different views about intervention, about military action, and I think it's a shame if we start to politicise the wearing of the poppy, because that's really not what it's about.
So, Ms. Madeleine, what do you say to that? By not wearing it, you're actually being political?
I'd say it's a little ironic that it's a politician saying that when politicians do frequently. There's covert pressure in the media for news people in the news, for actors, for politicians all to wear the poppy. I mean, it was a big deal when Jon Snow didn't wear one. So I think the people that wear it often do like to make it into a political point. The fact that not wearing one is even considered a statement when it should just be a personal choice.
Let's bring on Tom Thorpe on that. Tom, there is a sense that there is a national obligation to wear the poppy. What do you think about that? Do you think it's right?
Well, I think it's about choice and about what you take from it. And I think it's important that this debate shows that the lack of historical knowledge about the First World War and the ongoing debates about why people should do it as opposed to its original purpose. And it's also important to realise that the poppy has always been controversial. For instance, in 1933, the white poppy was created by the Women's Cooperative Guild, as a pacifist symbol. So, it's always been controversial. But I think it's also important to get back to, debunk the myths of the First World War, which, organisations like the Western Front Association, of which I'm the chair of the Antrim and Down branch, seek to do.
Gemma, do you think that point resonates, that actually the true meaning of the poppy and really remembering the First World War has been forgotten?
Well, can I just clarify, it's entirely a personal choice whether people want to wear a poppy or not, and I don't in any way criticise Madeleine for not wearing a poppy. It's the reasons that she's giving and the opinions that she has about what the poppy means that I disagree with. Yes, I know, but you put words in my mouth earlier, so it's important to clarify it.
Because of the First World War, do you think that it is the First World War that people still wear it for today?
I think that plays a large part, but actually I think people wear it for people who have died in all of the conflicts since then as well. And obviously, we have families today who have lost people in Iraq and Afghanistan and other conflicts. So I think people wear it to remember all of the fallen, as I say, without passing any judgment on whether those interventions were the right thing or the wrong thing.
But we don't have conscription these days. These people who go to fight in Iraq and Afghanistan, they know what they're getting into when they join the army. It's very different, isn't it, from remembering those who were conscripted into war all those years ago?
No, I don't agree with you. We rely on people to volunteer, to come forward, to keep our country safe, to act abroad when we deem it is necessary. And quite honestly, we owe it to them when they sadly have to make the ultimate sacrifice, which too many of them do. I think we owe it to them to pay what I think is actually quite a small tribute, just to wear this poppy at this time of year. But as I say, it is completely a personal choice, and some people I know still choose to remember. They might attend a service this Sunday without actually wearing the poppy. But people choose to remember in different ways. What's important is that we don't start to ascribe political opinions to the wearing of the poppy.
Maddy Fry, people are involved in the armed services these days for all sorts of reasons, and of course it's not just war, it's things like peacekeeping and helping out in medical situations. Should there not be a tribute to these people? Are you not being disrespectful by not wearing it?
I do believe that people say currently helping to fight Ebola, they're doing something quite heroic. But I'm afraid, I don't believe, I'm not behind the people who operate drone strikes, and I'm not behind the people who marched into Afghanistan and Iraq. And if that's disrespect, then so be it. But it was their choice to sign up. And yes, the politicians make the wars, but soldiers know when they go in that they might be asked to fight in wars that are unjust. And I'm sorry, but it is a political point to say that the armed forces are always fighting to defend our freedoms. I don't think Iraq and Afghanistan were about defending our freedoms. I think they're about something far more sinister, and that it came at the price of hundreds of dead surface personnel and thousands of dead civilians.
When you look at the mood of the nation, you look at the images from the Tower of London, the seas of red poppies around it, the extraordinary numbers of people who've come to see this installation unexpectedly. I don't think the Tower or anybody who organised it imagined that it would be as popular. It seems that what you're saying is out of tune with a lot of the general population. There's been a lot of controversy about that memorial itself. One critic suggested that perhaps it should be a sea of bones and skulls around the tower. Would you think that is a more appropriate way to remember war?
Actually, yes, I think that's quite poignant. I mean, the First World War was just so horrendous and such a pointless waste of life, in my view. And I'm not claiming to speak on behalf of the rest of the country. This is my personal view. And I would never say another person shouldn't wear the poppy. That's their view. But I do believe that in some ways, having a sea of bones would be a far more timely and far more relevant reminder of what actually happened in the First World War and what war is actually about.
Tom Thorpe, we've only got a minute left, but do you think the poppy masks the true horror of war?
I think it's impossible for anybody who's not experienced war to actually understand that. I mean, I've read a lot of accounts, and people's emotions and reactions to war are complex, and they're not all about horrendous appallingness. People did enjoy the war, and I know that's hard and difficult to the narrative that Madeline's talking about, but people's experience of war is complex, and many soldiers didn't actually see the front line and served in logistics and behind the front line. So I think we must again go back to the history and look at what people have experienced, and it's always far more complex, and their motivations are far more complex, and what they experienced and what they took from it is much more than just the Great War poets and how it was all just appalling misery. It was appalling, and I wouldn't want to go through it, but I think people are far more complex, and let's go back to the history and look at it.
Historical and complex debate. Tom Thorpe, Maddy Fry and Gemma Dawes, thank you all very much.